Could I bring my panelists up? So this is a great panel because you are actually going to hear from, I think, 4 of the strong and probably most prominent leaders in the drone delivery business. I'm going to ask them to all start with a brief introduction of themselves and an introduction of the operation that you have for drone delivery, kind of what your aircraft is, what your emphasis is, and then we'll go from there. So Dallas?
Hi, I'm Dallas Brooks. I'm the aviation regulatory lead for Wing, which means that I get to talk to Jay a lot, which is obviously a big plus in my business. What we do at Wing, for those of you who haven't seen the many videos that we've put out over the years, Wing is focused on package delivery to homes and businesses, primarily in suburban areas in big cities. We do this through a concept that we call nests, which are very small facilities where we house our aircraft and our aircraft operate from. And the idea is these nests are fairly low cost to implement, and they're very low footprint, both environmentally and otherwise. That no matter where you live in these areas, that you're probably only about three or so miles from a nest. Our airplane is designed specifically to present the lowest risk profile possible, just inherently, as opposed to having a lot of different kinds of systems to sort of reduce risk. We've chosen to make the airplane just as light and breakable as possible. We've kept all the rotor size is small. The airplane has 14 engines or 16 on our new model. And those motors, obviously, we could fail 5, 6 of them at a time, and the airplane still performs admirably, can do all the things that it was intended to do. And it's primarily just 10 pounds of styrofoam. So if there's some reason it needs to land somewhere, even with multiple failures, it lands very, very gently. It always clears the way underneath it for any obstacles, the possibility of people or children or dogs or anything else, and sets itself down very, 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 very slowly, even in the worst contingency situations. So the airplane itself just doesn't present much risk at all, both in the air and the ground. If it does hit something, that it basically breaks into about 7 different pieces of styrofoam and flutters to the ground and for most of its parts. And keeping the airplane that light obviously limits us a little bit in terms of the payload that we carry. Our payloads run about somewhere around 3.3 pounds. But that's a lot of things that people tend to need in a hurry. So if you're, for example, in our partnership with Walgreens, we're operating in the Dallas area now. I want to say something like 70+% of the things on their shelves weigh less than 3 pounds. And so if you need something delivered from your local Walgreens, instead of having to pop in your car and drive down and come back and not just burn the gas, but obviously there's always risks of potential car accidents and things of that nature. Instead, you just order it up on your app, and it arrives at your home in minutes. We never touch the ground from the time that we leave the nest until the time we return to the nest. So our airplanes take off, they hover, they do what's called what we call a Fitbit, but it's basically an entire system self-check, declares itself ready to go, and then and this is at about an altitude of 20 feet, and then it lowers a winch. Wing employee or Walgreens employee or whoever's working at the time takes our hex tote carton, which is designed to be very, very stable in the air, pops it on the hook, the airplane winches it up, locks it in, flies at altitude to the destination, descends back down to 20 feet, the winch comes down, depositing that package in whatever area of your property you've told us to do that, right? Whether it be your driveway or your backyard or whatever it is. Gently releases the packages on the ground. It literally just, it touches lightly, the hook itself falls off, winch it back up and go home, do it again. Our system is extraordinarily automated. So while we have pilots in our loop, our pilots never actually do anything. From the time the order comes in, our central system notifies the vendor of what's needing to be delivered, so they're preparing the package. It plans the route, it deconflicts the route of the drone. It selects the drone to be used to make sure that one is fully charged and has already gone through its Fitbit and is ready to go. And then at the appointed time, as soon as the package is ready, the airplane lifts itself off, the winch comes down, and the process that I just explained happens. And then when the airplane comes back, every time it lands on a charging pad. and so it charges itself up and is ready to go for the next mission, right? We do an extensive amount of health monitoring on our aircraft all the way through, so every system is closely monitored, and if anything comes out of limits during the flight, then that airplane is automatically degraded and taken out of the active inventory until we can get to it and run it through our maintenance process. Contingency management is a big deal for us against safety. So if the airplane encounters a situation that it can't overcome by returning to the nest, then it's designed to pick a spot that's very, very safe. There are sort of pre-selected areas. We've gone through every area that we operate and removed all the places that are obvious, right? You can't land in somebody's home or in a street or anything like that. And the remaining areas, our airplane is capable of scanning on the way down to make sure that we're not getting near anything during our very, very slow descent to a touchdown. If this were to ever happen, and the odds are incredibly high, but if this were ever to happen, hopefully if you came upon a wing airplane on a field somewhere near your house, you would pick it up and call the number, or not touch it, call the number, and we'll come pick it up, and then we'll give you something very nice for your trouble. But that's essentially our ConUp. It's worked very, very well. We operate in 3 countries today, right? So, in Australia, in the US, and in Finland. And I can't tell you how many, but a good number is coming within the next year plus. Our total count is well north of 250,000 commercial drone operations to actual customers, actual deliveries, not mock deliveries or fake deliveries or test deliveries. That's where we are. We're approaching 300,000 very quickly. And we've done some customer satisfaction surveys for folks who have lived in the areas where there's drone delivery, and satisfaction rate is hovering right around 90% for everyone who lives in the area, and that includes surveying people who have used the service, who might use the service, or who have indicated they really don't want the service. The response has been positive across the board.
All right. Well, thank you, Dallas. So we'll contrast that. We'll go to Jim, then we'll go to Tom, then Sean. So Jim, you have a very different kind of approach with your operation.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm Jim O'Sullivan, VP of Regulatory Strategy for Matternet. So Matternet's focus is on medical drone delivery. We're currently operational in Europe. In Switzerland, we fly daily over Zurich and Lugano. And in the US, we provide our technology to UPS Flight Forward, who flies in North Carolina and Florida. So because we focus on medical delivery, chain of custody is more important. And we handle that by essentially having an operator load the payload into a payload box. The aircraft transports it to its destination, lands, and the payload box is retrieved and then provided to the customer. We also have a swappable battery so that the aircraft can be made ready for flight again immediately. In addition to the manual approach of landing and having operators operate the aircraft, we've developed some automated ground infrastructure, which we call the station. It's essentially a robotic hangar where the aircraft can land, be loaded and unloaded automatically, and have its battery swapped, and then essentially provide the payload directly to an end user who doesn't have to be trained. And so in the US, UPS Flight Forward operates our system under Part 135. And recently, to support that, we achieved Type Cert yesterday, actually.
Yep, that's, I know we keep talking about it, but it's because it's such an incredible achievement and really a testament to Matternet's perseverance as well as your technical quality. So Tom, DroneUp does delivery with a major retailer. Could you describe your operation?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you. I realized as I was standing back there before we came up that somebody must have canceled, and I had to have been an alternate, seeing who's on the stage here. So thanks for letting me fill in a gap. As many of you know, we partnered with Walmart last year to help develop and expand their drone delivery program. We're currently operating under Part 107, which I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about and have had, but to kind of give you a little catch up of how we got here, when the pandemic hit, we were given the opportunity to partner with Walmart to conduct contactless-free delivery of COVID test kits. And that was a significant yes when we said yes, because up until that date, we had never conducted a drone delivery operation ever. But you know the entrepreneurial spirit, it's go back to the lab and figure it out. But part of the reason that we had not conducted drone delivery is we really didn't see the path to it. What was the platforms going to be? Where was the technology? Where was the regulatory puck going to be? The radius just seemed so big, too big to predict. And we weren't a hardware manufacturer, so there was really no reason for us to be in delivery until we were given that opportunity. And a couple of things happened that really changed our perspective on it. One was our goal over the 9-week period in the 3 different locations around the country was to do a couple of hundred deliveries if we could. We actually did nearly 5 times that because of the demand, and once people became aware that they could do this. And one of the interesting stories I tell, because we got a chance to see this public perception and narrative thing really change, was we would have people who were unwilling to get in the car to drive to the Walmart to go through the free COVID test kit, but they would have the COVID test kit delivered to them by drone and then drive to the Walmart to tell us how cool it was. And people who were outside of the range were driving to the Walmart, asking us why we couldn't deliver to them, and then going to friends' house that were in range and placing orders. And we realized, okay, this is interesting. That is it a novelty because they're stuck in and they want to see something new? I mean, we had deliveries where there were house parties going on and we couldn't deliver because they were all standing outside. But obviously now the technology has advanced. Our operation is similar in a lot of ways to everyone else's in the fact that we take orders. Right now, our process is we are delivering 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. In under 30 minutes from a list of a little over 20,000 SKUs. We're seeing increased demand. We're seeing about a 70% reorder rate, which is a really important statistic for us. Our operations, again, very similar to everyone else's, are fully autonomous. And when we say fully autonomous, we mean the pilot only actually pushes 2 buttons. They're classically trained through our training programs and through our training academy of how to operate in the event that autonomy fails, because there will be a day when it does. But the same thing, the order comes in, it automatically goes into our system. Our system creates and dynamically creates routes to minimize flights over people and moving vehicles through a series of algorithms while it's in flight. Using AI and other technologies, including cell detection from the ground, we're able to dynamically alter our routes, not just the routes that of our deliveries, but if we're doing services, because we also do drone services in the area, we're able to deconflict those. So the only 2 times that the pilot actually does anything is once the checklist is complete, he pushes the button to launch. That could be done automatically, but out of an abundance of caution, we don't. And then when he's over the delivery area, there has to be a 2-factor check to ensure that there's nothing on the ground that could create any hazards, and he pushes the button to deliver, and then we're done. That's all we do. We deliver from anywhere from 80 to 200 feet, depending on conditions and accuracy requirements. I think the number one thing that's important is, while we understand we're operating under a limited radius, what we are really trying to accomplish is get an infrastructure built, get operations going every day in different environmental conditions, in disparate locations, so that we can learn and continue to evolve our processes and our technologies and test technologies. For example, we just reached 103,000 flights in the US, delivery flights in the United States, all of them autonomous. And what's an interesting thing, and we'll talk probably about it more later, is at some point the 300,000 number added to the 105,000 number added to the whoever knows what thousands of numbers that we're starting to see with such a safety record. And people say, well, that's fine, you're safe because you're flying within visual line of sight. No, the other thing I verified this morning is in that 103,000 flights, we never once had to take manual intervention to prevent any airspace issues because of our airspace risk mitigation technologies and strategies. So we're really excited about the approach we're taking. We think it's a group effort, and all the things we're doing are going to assist each one of us in the industry to help move this thing forward.
And you just had a very exciting announcement in the Commonwealth of Virginia, didn't you?
We did. We are expanding our headquarters, and we're also building a training academy. And I was fortunate enough to visit the governor's mansion for the announcement that we'll be hiring an additional 655 people over the course of the next 12 months.
Yeah, you can always tell us Virginians. We refer to it as the Commonwealth. Everyone else refers to it as the state.
That's right.
Okay, so Sean, what's going on at Amazon Prime Air?
Nothing at all.
Nothing? Well, we sort of knew that. We just needed you to confirm it for us.
Well, first of all, good morning and welcome, as I like to joke yesterday, to the Witness Protection Program, because I can't see a single face out there.
Yeah, the waterboarding will be
The
next.
waterboarding will be in. So, my name is Sean Cassidy. I'm Director of Safety, Flight Ops, and Regulatory Affairs for Prime Air. That's Amazon's drone delivery program. I've been with the program, hard to believe I'm in my 8th year now, and it's been a really interesting ride so far to kind of see the arc of the program. We started out very much as kind of a research and development focused program with doing what Amazon does very well, and that's safely innovating on behalf of the customer. We're always looking for more efficient, effective ways to be able to satisfy our core clients, our customers, and do so in a manner that they find very pleasing, very acceptable, and we've a keen focus on ensuring the safety of the operations, but also eliminating any of the pinch points that get in the way of the customer experience. So fast forward a few years, back in 2020, we had gone through a number of prototypes, various designs, different form factors, some of which you've probably seen on television going all the way back to 2016, when we made our first public debut and our first delivery demonstration in the United Kingdom. We have landed on the system that you actually see out in the booth outside here in the conference area. And the interesting thing about the way that we came to the design that we have right now is we eliminated or abandoned all preconceived notions of what an aircraft should actually look like. Again, we started with a customer. We said, what can we do in terms of developing an aircraft and a surrounding system that can be built into our infrastructure, that has sufficient reliability, performance, the ability to operate in variable weather conditions, namely winds, have sufficient range to get out to a good chunk of our customers from our local fulfillment centers, which is where we kind of keep all our goods and warehouse it. And the interesting thing is that unlike a lot of the other designs that you see out there, which are predominantly fixed wing aircraft that have that have pusher props for wingborne flight, but also a lot of the operations also incorporate a VTOL element, much like what Matternet's M2 is. The hybrid version is the Hummingbird, which is what Wing flies. And we're actually a little bit different, so I think you're asking for how to draw out distinctions. We take off like a Matternet, like a VTOL, a vertical aircraft, but we fly in wingborne flight, kind of like what Wing does. And the thing that's remarkable about the system is that it has the ability to maneuver with 6 degrees of freedom. So if you were to look at like the center of the aircraft, the center of mass, you can actually yaw left to right, you can go up and down, you can rotate, and all around its axis. So props to our incredibly talented aerodynamicists and engineers who managed to create a means by which all those different requirements are built into an aerodynamic solution that allows for very stable flight and allows us for very, very highly precise deliveries to our customer locations. We got our first operating certificate back in 2020. I'm the Director of Operations, the FAA delegate for that operation. And between when we started our initial limited commercial operations back in 2020 and present, again, we've been innovating on behalf of the customer. We've incorporated dozens and dozens and dozens of design improvements, engineering improvements, reliability improvements, and performance improvements to the aircraft that you see out in the booth right now. And I'm very pleased that we have recently announced that we're opening up 2 delivery locations, one in College Station, Texas, and the second one in Lockford, California. And they're really built around the drone delivery system, unlike the way that we conducted our first operations, where we're taking the drone to a fairly rural, remote area and doing initial proof of concept and limited commercial operations. These are really 2 uniquely situated, uniquely designed locations where we have the warehousing operation on site, we have the flight control, the flight operations on site, we have maintenance on site. And we're really excited, incredibly excited, to be able to take this next phase of of our operations. Now, I've learned a long time ago not to put specific dates behind anything, especially when you're dealing with regulatory approvals and permissions and whatnot, but we are going to be launching those 2 sites highly, highly confidently to say that this year. So that's kind of where we are right now as a program. We're very excited about the fact that we've taken a slightly different approach. We're very much inspired by aerospace principles. We follow very, very rigorous design standards. We're very tough on ourselves in terms of our expectations for performance and the reliability of the system, and we're constantly refining the system, again, with the goal of the most safe, effective, and efficient delivery system possible, taking care of our customers. Probably one of the big distinctions is not only the ability to have graceful recoveries if you have any kind of events involving our system, which allow for the drone to either do a situation where you might have to land away from where our delivery location or our fulfillment center, our warehouse operation is, but also to have autonomous functions and built-in logic that really takes the operator and puts them on the loop for the operation, but it does not clobber them with a bunch of information that they would have to then react to and then discern and direct the aircraft to do something. By building in as much of that autonomy, as much as that fail-safe logic, and through using deterministic algorithms and predetermined functions, it allows us to monitor the operation, ensure the safe continued operations, and the ability to have that level of continuity and also increase the frequency of the operations to get to our customer. I started on safety, I'm going to finish on safety. One of the other things which is really, really unique about our system, if you've been out and seen it or possibly seen some of the videos that have been released associated with this next phase of our delivery operations, is perception. We have put an amazing amount of research and engineering design work, also accompanied by hardware-in-the-loop simulators, software-in-the-loop simulators, and live flight test events involving other objects, airborne objects, to refine the performance of our system. During the delivery phase, we have perception systems, computer vision, that basically are screening for your descent path. And if there's anything that's in that descent path that would be deemed too close in for where you intend to drop your package, then the system will autonomously reject the delivery. As an operator in command, there's nothing I can do to override the system. If the system trips something, the perception system says there's something in the way, the aircraft is returning home. I have no say over that. Likewise, when it gets down to do the actual delivery, it does a low hover and releases the package. It doesn't land, which provides an additional margin of safety. And on top of that, there's another perception function where if anybody, a human being, an animal, or even if somebody inadvertently puts an object where our pre-designed, predestined marker is, which will allow them to uniquely deliver to that one location, again, the aircraft will autonomously reject the delivery, and that's also another kind of default function. And again, as the operator in command, there's not a thing I can do to tell the system that I know better and you should go ahead and release that package. So I think that's kind of one of the big distinctions in the level of work that we've done and the focus on, again, safely innovating on behalf of the customer. The next phase is also incorporating the airborne functions, the wing-borne functions with our perception system, so that way we have a similar function where the aircraft detects another object or fixed object or an animate object in flight, and again, has a closed-loop function which will allow the aircraft to autonomously maneuver to avoid another object without any intervention of the operator. The cellular system goes down. If any of the external inputs go down, the aircraft will still perform the safest function possible. And so I think that we've kind of taken this kind of design philosophy and an engineering philosophy that says, look, let's make sure that in all these occasions we have a graceful way to, of course, get to our customer, which is our first priority, but do it safely. And if we can't meet both of those conditions, then we're going to return home and figure out what happened and learn from it and continue the operation.
All right, well, thank you to all four of you. I think the thing that strikes me is everyone is hyper-focused on safety. a tremendous amount of autonomy that not only goes into controlling the flight, but manages your safety, right? Slightly different ways your operators interact with your systems, but largely around just managing the overall flight versus controlling the drone. And we've got everything from a 10-pound bicycle helmet foam drone with, aren't they golf club shafts for the rigid part?
They're even lighter than that.
Yeah. Up to, how heavy is your aircraft, Sean?
It's in the upper 80-pound range.
Right. So a big difference, right? And both of you are right in the middle, if I remember right.
Yeah, we're about to achieve a 10-pound capacity, but we're staying under 55. So.
Yeah, and we're 29 pounds all up.
So the other thing that strikes me is if you've seen or experienced one drone delivery service, you've experienced one. They're all a little bit different. Like it's the old joke, if you've been to one airport, you've been to one airport.
Right.
So now the next question is, most of us entered into the pandemic with a set of assumptions about how drone delivery would be used during the pandemic. And then we've all come out of the pandemic seeing some of that actually occur and some changes we never predicted. I open it up to any or all of the panelists. What's your pre-post pandemic delivery? How did COVID affect the way you do drone delivery or how you think about it?
I can take a shot at that.
Yeah.
So, given that we operate in the medical drone delivery space, we thought that the COVID pandemic would be a boon to our operations. We thought that the hospitals would need even more transportation of medical samples. What ended up happening, though, is that the hospitals in the midst of the pandemic hunkered down and really focused on doing business the way they already knew. They didn't want to experiment with new methods of transportation. So it actually had somewhat of an adverse impact initially during the pandemic.
Now, Tom, you gave a great story. That was, they get the COVID test delivered and then drive to the Walmart.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so for us, I mean, pre-pandemic, I can't really speak to that because everybody up here was been doing it.
You really, it opened up your delivery service.
Well, so the thing that we don't talk about is on the aerial data collection side, our traditional drone services division, we grew 1,016% in the 1 year following the pandemic because it created a need for drones that could go out and do inspections that people would normally be traveling to do, and we could do them from a distance. And so that business grew rapidly, but that also encouraged us. But I think what we really saw, and it continued the more we started actually doing residential deliveries, is the interesting thing we're getting is not just the data from all the flights and everything, but it's the type of orders and what people order, and the longer they seem to be kept inside. I mean, there's a big joke, and everybody knows it. They laugh about it, but it's true. Is the number one most ordered item is hamburger helper, right? Which is
I didn't
really
know
is.
that.
And number two is mac and cheese. But again, these are only from 3 locations that are operating. We're now in the process. We're opening 34 more locations this year. So I think, unfortunately, we're going to have much more locations, about 100 new locations next year. We're going to have all these new locations and new data, but now we're kind of post-pandemic, so I don't know how much of this data is really going to be able to relate to pre-post kind of pandemic consumer demand.
So, Dallas, I know in Christiansburg, you've got some great stories about how kind of the community embraced you differently during the pandemic and some of the things that you started delivering that you never had thought you were going to deliver.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Christiansburg was our U.S. Sort of proof of concept location. Nice little college town. And when the pandemic hit, the things that we thought we would see increased deliveries of, such as COVID test kits, right? We were all prepared for that. Didn't increase nearly as much as orders for cupcakes and treats of various nature, basically comfort food for those folks that were stuck at home, right? And in Australia, which was a much different situation because they were locked down heavily. In some areas of the country, you couldn't leave your home unless you had a pass that said that you were good to do so for some period of time. The entire region embraced what we were doing. And you know, at the time, and still, we were not charging for our service. And so folks said, you know, thank you for that, and began to order just all sorts of things that they needed. And you know, even at 3.33 pounds, there would be 3, 4, 5 orders to a given home in a day, just to get what they needed, right? So on one side, it was helping people in terms of, you know, material needs and things they needed to have to get through the day, and the other times it was helping people just to feel better, right, during those times. And so we appreciated both of those. I learned a lot from both of those, and it's certainly changed the way that we look at what we do. We've always looked at it as this is something that could change the world in a very positive way. We focused on environmental benefits, right, and reducing, you know, car accidents and all the great safety things, but the human part of it was something that we really got a chance to see up front. We're very, very grateful for that.
So it's been quite the journey for everyone in the industry, and you've all faced some challenges. And again, I'll open this up to any and all of the panelists. What are the challenges that really stick with you and were the hardest to get through?
You mean besides the FAA?
Yeah, including the FAA.
I promise I'm just kidding.
Oh, that's fine.
Well, I'll kick things off here. So I think many of you are familiar with the fact that we wrapped up aviation rulemaking activity for Beyond Visual Line of Sight. A bunch of folks here, and many of you in the audience were involved in that as well. And one of the things that the BVLOS ARC was squarely pointed at was normalizing the process by which applicants would get approvals through the exemption and the waiver process, which can be very tedious, very manual, a lot of mechanics involved in doing that. So I think if you kind of look at the report out from the ARC in some of the core areas, I think one of the most immediate thing that needs to happen is to look at some of the key points that we provided in the ARC report. The fact that there have already been millions of operations involving drones, and they've been conducted quite safely. They've been highly mitigated. The large majority of them were conducted under the Part 107 rule, which is an operations rule. Now it's time to envision what the next steps are, you know, beyond the very kind of contained Part 107 operations, but mindful of the fact that these things are already happening right now. There seems to be this mentality that this is such a futuristic notion that we should be able to expand the operations and go beyond line of sight of the operation. But if you look at the track record right now, it's quite good. And so I think like one of the biggest challenges, being able to have an applicant that can go in and demonstrate that they're operating in a certain location that involves low density operations, that they're flying below a certain altitude, that they're operating a drone up to a certain mass and they're staying with a certain speed, and normalize the manner by which they get those approvals, as opposed to have to go in and do this kind of one-off approach for every single one of those operations. More broadly applied, that also involves some of the things involving federal action, especially working through the environmental assessment or review process, which is defined under the National Environmental Policy Act, which basically dictates that if you have any kind of federal action, rulemaking or whatnot, it has to go through an additional review process. If you can kind of categorize these type of operations as being somewhat similar in terms of the frequency, the altitude, the density, and everything else, there should be the means by which hopefully some of that will be codified in the rule. So by conforming to the rule, you will satisfy those requirements. But there has to be a way to kind of normalize it. And as Dave Bolter was talking about yesterday, have these kind of buckets of grants which allow applicants to kind of follow the same kind of template that the previous ones did. So that, because otherwise you cannot do a one-off approach and hit the kind of volume and scale that everybody here is looking to do.
Yeah, and the one-off approach is difficult for us as well as the regulator. It's a tremendous amount of work for you and for us, and it's our goal as well to normalize these operations. And I can just speak from my experience. I think the thing that is most challenging for us as the regulator, beyond just getting to the new rules that normalize it, is when you do waivers or exemptions, particularly to the parts that were designed for crewed aviation. That just tells you the prescriptive what and how, but the why is missing. So we often have to back out, why did we put this rule in place? And does it make sense to apply it under these conditions in the same way it was intended? The other thing that we've really come to grips with is those rules are so inherently driven by the assumptions of a crew and people on the airplane that's exactly why we're moving in the direction we are regulatorily, is to try and look at and follow the advice of the ARC, that you really need a new set of rules, that you don't have to back out all those assumptions, and they're actually written for the drone community, the drone world, and has almost the inherent assumptions about how you operate. Yeah, Tom.
I want to go back to what you asked, though, because I think this is probably one of the most important opportunities for our industry to get over this hump. And that is, you said, what has been the challenge? And I think at the end of the day, what's really been the challenge is not just for us, for you, for us together, the whole industry is, we don't have data. We haven't had data. Even today, and you and I talked about this, we don't have a mechanism to collect the number of flights and to actually compile that together with what's really happening and how are people doing and how are the autonomous systems behaving. So let's be candid, the rules, even through the ARC, are still being driven very much by beliefs, opinions, and desired business outcomes. We are still not really at the point where we're saying these are what the rules should be, or these are the safety mitigation strategies, air, ground risk, air risk, doesn't matter to me, based on real data. I don't think we're still doing that today. And I mean, you guys may disagree with me, but I still believe it's very much an opinion and belief-driven process. I mean, even in the ARC, I mean, you go back and look at the ARC, there were some numbers, but oftentimes it was stakeholders' opinions and beliefs and trying to transition and really build rules around what's been a traditional aviation model, right?
So one thing the ARC did point out around data and aeronautical research is you have to approve some level of flights just to collect the data. So you get into this chicken and egg problem. How far do you allow people to fly to collect the data and do it safely so you can then establish the bases for expanding those rules? And that's been a challenge for all of us.
There's a way to do that, though. So, for example, we flew 220,000 plus operations in Australia, and it's not like gravity or physics work differently in Australia. Those things are all valid, and that kind of data is available.
Well,
But the toilets
water
flush the other
does.
way.
The toilets flush the other way, yes.
The engineers will correct you.
But flights are flights, and safety is safety, and their rules look a lot like our rules. And we can tell you, because all of our systems are so highly automated, we've got data logs on every little hiccup for whatever reason. So there is data available, successful operations data. We just have to open our aperture a little bit to be able to look at it all. But I want to focus on something else if I can, and that's how we do traditional aircraft certification and approvals is still very much functionally oriented. So, does your aircraft have this kind of a system? And if that system fails, what does it fail to? Does it fail to redundancy? Does it fail to a human backup? Does it fail to whatever? And so when your general policies are sort of written that way, then the person doing the evaluation can say, okay, here's my checklist. Do they have a function for this? They have a function for this, and it goes down the line, right? What do you do in a contingency and you lose an engine? What do you do if your GPS fails? What do you do if you're whatever? And one of the things we talked about in the ARC that was so important is we all do those things differently, but we all do those things safely. And so focusing less on the outcome of a series of functions, because one of the challenges the FAA has is creating a policy that encompasses Amazon's operations and Wing's operations when they're very, very different. And instead focusing on a risk-based approach to where no matter what approach that we chose to get there, we achieved the appropriate level of safety. And that be the exit strategy from the process. So are we safe enough? And that allows us to be creative in the way that we do it. It allows us to innovate in ways that not only help the drone industry, but the aviation industry writ large. And that's why the ARC made the recommendation that they did.
Yeah, I want to go back to the data point you brought up, Tom. And as you and I discussed, I think there's real promise in the drone safety team becoming something analogous to the commercial aviation safety team on the large aircraft side, where it becomes the place where people can share data. It's de-identified. It allows both government and industry to look at the trends in the data and determine at an aggregate level where should we be applying our safety controls and mitigations. And so for everyone here, if you're not involved in the drone safety team, I encourage you to get involved. And for the leaders of the drone safety team, I think we need to really go back and think about how we build that infrastructure for that kind of data, because it definitely is something missing for this nascent industry.
Yeah, that's a really important point that Tom brings up, and I think that when we were chewing through that in the rulemaking committee, we realized early on that it has to be a balance between qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis. Qualitative being, do you have the appropriate mitigations, operating checklist, safety mitigation program, all the things that every operator would have to do in order to satisfy the conditions needed to ensure the safety of the operation, which is why part of the report pointed towards light sport aircraft, because that's basically a process by which you determine and validate that a system is airworthy, but it's mostly through qualitative type achievements. Do you have a maintenance manual that specifies the intervals that you need to service the aircraft? Do you have a checklist for your operators? Do you have contingency plans? All these things that are basically part of the things that an operator or an applicant would have to do through a compliance declaration to establish that the system would be airworthy or suitably safe for the intended business case, and subject to full audit and scrutiny by the FAA. Taking one step beyond that, where I think we need to evolve in terms of airworthiness and certification, and obviously Dallas has spent, and I've spent way too much time next to each other because I had the same thoughts, is there has to be kind of more refined ways of accepting and validating the data. The airworthiness basis that came out recently was slightly modified to allow for other formal methods of submission for data that would determine that the aircraft would be deemed to be airworthy. And that could be a combination of flight test, which is done through the durability and reliability campaign. That's data points right there because you're demonstrating against likely failure modes. You have to fly a certain amount of hours, but you should also be able to adopt some of the tried and true methods that have already been well entrenched within legacy aviation. And that's modeling, that's simulation, that's accelerated life cycle testing, all those things which allow an applicant to maybe compress the timeline in which they get from walking in the door to emerging with a type certificate, but do so in a way that satisfies the regulator in terms of the data, both through modeling, simulation, and testing, and also physical flight operations. So the data is out there, it's coming in through all these programs, but now we got to figure out a way to make the best use of it.
So you've already started on the next question I was going to pose, but I'll formally pose it. What are the next challenges for all of us as both the operators, the manufacturers, and the regulator? What's on the, Jim?
Yeah, I think one of the next big challenges is the operational approval stage. So once we have airworthiness proven, we need a clear and predictable process for getting operational approval. We can't tell our customers, we don't know if we can approve you. We don't know how long it's going to take to get an answer. We need to have a more predictable process for that.
Yeah, ultimately, we'd like to get all of you operating to a rule, so you really don't have to talk to us about getting up and running. We just do our normal continued, oh, never mind.
Safety continuum?
No, I'll think of it in a moment. The needle skipped a groove, and or for new, yeah, I guess you have to be of a certain generation to understand that reference, but.
I'm there.
Hey, Jay, vinyl's making a comeback.
Yeah. Continuous operational safety, that's what I was trying to say. Yeah. Agreed. We do need a more predictable path, and I know that David Bolter, I know the colleagues I work with are trying to find those paths, and things like moving towards summary grants, those sort of patterns everyone can follow that then establishes policy and starts bringing in data that supports rulemaking as well.
I think, does anybody else have one thing which is kind of responsive to that is and it's what Jim just talked about, and that's the operating approvals.
Yeah.
When the certification and the airworthiness process first was formalized, the off-board functions for the system were actually incorporated as part of the core certification. But since then, they created this thing called associated elements, which is kind of this hybrid where you have to validate the performance of the off-board systems, the things that are talking to the drone, not necessarily the onboard software systems on the drone itself, and kind of manage that through a configuration process, interface control documents, all these other kind of things. But it's a little bit of a outlier because if you create the system, you have to go through an operational approval to make sure that the things that the off-board systems are telling the drone to do are done reliably and predictably and everything else. But it's kind of difficult from the certification side of the house to understand how to find compliance against that function, because it may or may not be built into the core design of the aircraft itself. And I think that's one of the big challenges we're all going to face is how do we incorporate this approach, because we don't have the pilot in the flight deck anymore. The pilot's remotely on the ground, or the person who's fulfilling that function, and that creates a little bit more of a criticality.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, that's right.
Right, and oftentimes not even in the location where the flight is occurring.
Well, on the ground could be anywhere.
Yeah, I
Doesn't
understand
mean in the
that.
nest, but and so how do you kind of approach that and validate it, and then how do you change the system? How do you do software revisions that improve the performance of the system? And I see Dallas is nodding, and it's something we've all been talking about. How do you do change management?
To put a finer point on that, legacy aviation tends to rely on equipment that is built specifically for that purpose. And the drone industry uses a lot of what we call commercial off the shelf, right? And nobody wants to try and manage the configuration of Microsoft operating systems or other Linux, Unix, or whatever in the same way that you would legacy aviation. And so that's kind of the challenge you're bringing up, isn't it?
Exactly.
And when you think about, and Sean even knows better than I with his background, but that a block upgrade for an airline, aircraft is a big deal. And how, that testing has to go, software and hardware, we're talking particularly about software now.
It can take up to 10 years.
Absolutely, because you have to make sure not only the software works on the box that it's running on, but the interfaces that it has to all the other boxes, they work as well and haven't been affected in any way. And the regression testing and everything else that goes along with that. The drone industry is at a point where we're innovating so incredibly rapidly, right? And quite frankly, the consequences of an error are so much less. We're not talking about 200 people on an airliner that's full of fuel crashing into a neighborhood, right? We're talking about, in our case, a 10-pound styrofoam drone that might flutter a little bit before it hits the ground, right? And we all have different safety recovery methods. But that software testing needs to happen very fast, because almost every update that I can think of, we do some updates to tweak a little bit of performance out of the airplane. But most of the updates we do are to make the airplane more reliable or more safe. And slowing those down actually retards the safety progress that we could be making. And there is such a thing as enough testing for the intended purpose, and for the intended risk envelope. And when you define those things, you can move forward much more quickly.
Yeah, that's definitely a policy challenge for us too. Particularly those of us who came from legacy aviation and for years worked under that system. And I think to a certain extent, you've burned in those neural networks in your brain. And it's sometimes hard to think about the problem differently, which I think also gets to the point of, I think one of the big challenges that we all face is the workforce of the future that we need, both on the regulator side and on the manufacturers and operators. It's a very different workforce from legacy aviation. It has lots of opportunity to introduce diversity, equity, and inclusion, including accessibility. You don't need two legs to operate the rudder pedals on an aircraft anymore. And I know that from our folks in aviation medicine, that's one of their challenges is how do you assess the cognitive abilities of an operator in these versus the physical abilities that you typically go through in an airman check. So we have just about 5 minutes. Any thoughts about the workforce of the future?
Well, as you know, we just announced that we're building the training academy, our drone flight academy, and I think it's a really great question. I'd like to hear some of what the others think, but I'll tell you, we get asked this question all the time. What should high schools be doing to prep for the industry, and what should colleges be? I mean, we all get that question all the time. And the interesting thing is as our industry grows, we're creating jobs in so many different areas. I mean,
And they're additive. They're not subtractive.
that's right. And we've tried to create, we tell everybody we're trying to create a career at DroneUp, not a job. So, we've got different progressions and way that goes through it. But I think the important thing for us to acknowledge, at least DroneUp acknowledges, is we're not the answer to the last mile. We're part of the last mile ecosystem. And so what we really are focusing on is our autonomous systems, and not just the autonomous systems that operate our platforms, but autonomous systems that operate the associated robotic systems that we use and ground-based systems that we use, and creating that collective kind of autonomous ecosystem. So when you think about it like that, we really think that workforce doesn't really exist today that has the expertise in robotics, that has the expertise in automation, and not just autonomy for a single platform, but vertical autonomy across an ecosystem. That's going to be a workforce we're going to have to develop ourselves, and then we know the education systems will be 5, 6, 7 years behind before they start producing the workforce that I think we're going to be required to have.
Yeah, Dallas, you look like you.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about the workforce of my parents' generation and of most of my generation, largely highly procedural, right? So I go to work and I'm working at GM and I'm stamping out a part and I'm putting that part onto a car, and I'm doing that several thousand times a day. I go to McDonald's and I'm making Big Macs and I'm doing that several thousand times a day. Even all the way up to, no denigration, but to an airline pilot, highly procedural job, really complex one, not flipping burgers. You've got to know a lot of things, but there is a process, right? Am I executing my process? The people that we need, because now we're largely automating everything that can be automated from a process or procedural perspective. So what do we need? What we need are the people who can think about what that process should be. We need to think people that can think about how can we do this better or more efficiently or better for the environment, or how can we change our perspective and change the system to accommodate that, to where we're working together more efficiently and better, and that's where humans excel. So you can put a person in a procedural job and they can be mind-numbing all the way to retirement, or you can put them in a situation where they're taught to think and taught to create, and put them in a job that's going to be so much more fulfilling and provide opportunities for so many different kinds of people because of lack of rigorous physical requirements or whatever else. And so training tomorrow's workforce to look at the world around them, and I think a lot of them do this now, and think, how would I change this for the better, and what would it take to make that work? That's the people that we're going to be looking for.
Well, and I was struck by each of you talked about customer experience. For the regulator, that's something that we have no part in. We care that it's safe for the customer, we care it's safe for everyone. But that part of the workforce, we will have absolutely no touch on that, and that will be completely driven by industry.
So I kind of feel like after what Dallas said, my name's Sean Cassidy, I'm a recovered airline pilot. So, but on the panel that I was on yesterday,
Hi, Sean.
on the panel I was on yesterday, I said, look, I would dearly love to see the workforce not necessarily have to go through what I did. Bunch of years military flying, decades, a couple decades in the airlines, flying for a major airline and all that kind of stuff. Done right, when you're introducing the tech and the autonomy, the demographic of the incoming generation of folks that are fulfilling this function should not look like me. They should not have to go through all this stuff just to get to the point where you can call yourself an operator in command. Done right, I think the aperture should open up so that you can make sure that you have a very broad, diverse, and very interesting kind of mosaic of folks that are operating these systems. As long as the systems are designed appropriately, as long as the procedures are well understood, there's nothing to say that you can't grab a whole new generation of folks and train them up and to do the operation and do it safely.
Well, we're coming up to the end of our hour, and I want to thank all four of you for some very thoughtful comments and a laugh or two. It's always good to remind ourselves we take our work seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously. So in that vein, I usually ask people, what's your 30-second takeaway? I've decided to do something slightly different today. Your company's about to have a big product announcement, big to-do, and you're the one doing the announcing. What's your walk-on music as you come onto stage? Alice? And no Monty Python jokes.
No Monty Python jokes. Okay, we eliminated.
Wait a second, that was my song.
Actually, I'm going to flip it just a little bit. I'm imagining that I'm doing this at an FAA-sponsored event, an FAA-sponsored conference, in which case I would come out to Joan Jett's "I Hate Myself for Loving You."
All right, Sean?
We decided we didn't really like the question, and instead we're going to have a dance-off and invite you to start.
Fair enough.
I always go to Monty Python, always look on the bright side of life.
Oh, there we go.
I'm an eternal optimist.
All right, Jim.
I might have to go with the Jaws theme song.
And then the FAA comes out like this.
Not Baby Shark.
All right, Tom.
Just because I love the song. Lose Yourself by Eminem, that would be my song.
Oh, wow.
Excellent.
That's a good one.
So,
yeah.
Very good. I love the creativity of the answers. The one I would like to choose, I cannot choose as an FAA official. It would be inappropriate, but it's a crystal method called Name of the Game. So I'll go with something a little more lighthearted, and I'll go with Dua Lipa's Levitate, because that's what we want to do, levitate the whole industry.
I love it.
All right, so thank you very much to the audience, and enjoy the rest of the show.